Well, with studies underway seeking to determine how best to provide a new facility to serve our fire department and ambulance service, I thought it would be helpful if our fire chief could come and explain the project and share what else is happening in his bailiwick. Happily, Ed Walker agreed to join us this morning. It's a great privilege to welcome Chief Ed Walker.
Just if I come up front. Yeah. Okay. This is more for reference. You can take that with you. That's our handout. Thank you, Norm, and thanks everybody else. I appreciate the chance. I was supposed to be here in January, but I got my COVID a little bit sooner than Norm did, so I wasn't able to make it. But we'll just pass over that conversation for now. So, but thank you. As Norm mentioned, we, by we, I mean the town of Peterborough, is in the process of finally discussing building a fire station. The handout that I gave you is a flyer that we developed to give folks on information. May 11th, for those people here that are Peterborough town residents, is the open session of town meeting. There are 2 articles on the warrant, both have to do with the fire department. Article 14 is the article to raise and appropriate $2 million for the purpose of final design and construction documents for a new fire and ambulance facility, along with the associated site work on what we're referring to as the municipal campus. Little background. I know a number of you have been involved in town, and probably looking around here, some of you have even been involved in the town committees in Peterborough that have talked about this project. Going back to 2004, we all sort of refer to the Weller and Michael study, which the town had. Weller and Michael was an architectural firm out of Keene. They're still in existence. They did a study and looked at the fire department, the police department, the library, the recreation department, and what might be needed for future facilities for those buildings. None of that really went forward with a public process formally. In the ensuing decades, the Master Plan Steering Committee looked at these buildings and projects, various chapters of the master plan. There was an Evans Flats Steering Committee. And the one thing that was determined as they went through the whole thing was the area referred to as Evans Flats, which is where the current community center and DPW garage are, really bordered by Evans Road, Elm Street, and Route 101, is going to be utilized for your municipal campus. A couple of reasons for that. One is it is a sort of a gateway area to the town. Folks coming down 101 can see that area. They can look at it. It's a nice, flat, open area. The other part too is anybody here who ever follows news, one of the concerns always is residents want a fire station. They want it close by, but they don't want it next door. Same thing with the DPW garage. This is an area with very minimal residential impact. It also is property that doesn't have a lot of other value. You look at where the current fire station is at 16 Summer Street, that is prime downtown property. I mean, it's right there. You look at opportunities that exist for that, developing that, mixed use, commercial, residential, all residential. There are a lot of things that could be done. Even though that's in the floodplain, there are ways to work around that. For example, parking on the lower level and then, apartments or whatever up. So there's a lot of opportunities to put that back on the tax rolls because that's really a lot more valuable than that property. So fast forward through a bunch of iterations. The last time this project really had any significant traction was in around 2010, 2012. The town looked at Vose Farm Road right here where we are now, the Brookstone building, as the potential relocation for everything, highway, police, DPW, everything down in this area. That never really went anywhere because there were a lot of costs and a lot of concerns, similar to some of the ones that we heard when they looked at relocating the DPW down to Water Street. It's too far out of town. You're in one corner of the town, travel time for the trucks, the congestion around both Conval High School and SMS during peak hours with students coming and going. So that sort of fell by the wayside. Here we are now to 2022. In 2018, We spent $50,000. The town did through an article at town meeting, hired an architect to come in and reevaluate our programmatic study, look at the existing armory building up on Evans Flats, where the DPW is located. From that, what we came out with was the existing building really could not be effectively used as the fire station part of the building. It could potentially be used for other uses, but one of the problems is, although the building is very solidly built, the headers are too low. So you can't put overhead doors in. So it really precluded that from being used as the fire station part. And looking at that, we then received money at town meeting, moved forward with the preliminary design, which is where we are now. Preliminary design was completed using HKT architecture. I'm sure all of you know the kerfuffle that came out of that over a whole bunch of things. One being the gross cost for the facility, which although was preliminary, somehow got lodged in everybody's brain as the final dollar amount. And the second piece, which is more critical, is the town's ability to borrow. To quote Tyler Ward, our select board chair at the last task force meeting, this is probably the largest project the town of Peterborough will ever undertake. And that being said, one of the things they really weren't aware of was their bonding capacity. I mean, those folks who followed projects in town here, yes, the town does borrow a lot of money, but it borrows it in little increments. A couple million here, a million here, pay a bond down, do other stuff. We've never looked to capture this huge chunk of money at once. So what we discovered was that the gross amount in the preliminary design exceeded the town's ability to borrow. So that really put the whole project to, I don't want to say a halt, but it slowed us down. So what you have this year is Article 14, which is a warrant article to raise and appropriate $2 million for the purpose of final design for fire and ambulance facility and a municipal campus. That article also has a whole bunch of other language under it that says that we can use grants, we can use donations, we can use other funds towards this project. One thing that's really important to understand about New Hampshire municipal finance is the town is required to what's called gross appropriate. So if you know that it's going to cost you X dollars to buy something and you're in your own household and you've got a parent who's going to be giving you $100 for it, you only have to save your 100 and you only have to tell people I'm spending 100 on this because you're only spending 100. Well, in municipal government, you need to tell the taxpayers, hey folks, we're spending $2 million in this project. What you include in that article is that we're going to use monies from other sources. Nicole McStay is currently working through the Congressional Earmark Program, which is a program that allows municipalities and nonprofits to request funds directly through Congress. So we've submitted an application for that. We do have some money that we'll be putting into an expendable trust this year through ARPA, the American Recovery America Rebuild, I don't know what it is, the American Rebuild and Recovery Plan or something. But basically it's the money coming out of COVID to help boost and stimulate the economy. There's a block grant that towns were given based on population. So Peterborough's is about $700,000. That money is going into an expendable trust for the purpose of the campus. In a perfect world, we won't need that money for design because the criteria for that money is pretty broad. It really covers a lot of infrastructure type projects, which this campus is. So we like to be able to save that to potentially offset other costs further down the road, but we don't really know. So why do we need the $2 million? As you look through projects, the way you go through a municipal project is you start with your preliminary concept. Hey, we need a fire station. I don't think anybody disagrees with the fact we need a new fire station. That building was built in 1948. The fire department moved into it in 1972. It's on your handout in front of you. We did less than 50 calls in 1971 when we moved in there, and we're doing over 2,900 a year now. Now we have 4 people in the station 24/7 to provide ambulance service to Peterborough, the region, as well as transfers out of Medina Community Hospital. We have a day staff that fluctuates anywhere from 4 to 6 people during the day. And we're responding to calls, 24 hours a day with that. So that has changed. The other thing that has really changed is, there's something we're very conscientious about now in the fire service and aware of, and that is the leading cause of death for firefighters is cancer. fire and EMS personnel. And where we're getting that cancer is from things like the diesel exhaust on our apparatus, but also from our turnout gear. We go out, those carcinogens come back. So one of the things that has truly changed in public safety is really the need to separate your clean from your dirty and stuff like that. I should not say this out loud with an IT professional in the room, but our server room is also our boiler room. Because again, the building was built in 1948 when they hadn't even invented the computer yet, let alone realize the constraints and the concerns of that in looking at those things. So there's just a few examples, despite the fact, and it's in the floodplain, it leaks, heating, electricity are all antiquated and out of date. I mean, it isn't a healthy environment for our folks to be in. And that's been known for years. I mean, that was identified in 2004 when they went through that study. So I guess the biggest thing that with that little bit of background is as we move into Article 14, and you don't need to admit it here, but if you have looked on Facebook or followed social media, it's really interesting, some of the discussions about this. And what makes it really interesting is people will ask really thoughtful questions. And they'll bring something up, a point that was in an article or discussed maybe in one of the public meetings that was streamed, and it'll get answered very thoughtfully. But that's over here. Somebody else will ask the same question over here. The person who answered it here didn't see it. Instead, it gets a snide answer here, or the conversation heads down some weird rabbit hole that you never anticipated and you don't know. And now all of a sudden we're building a $23 million fire station. When we're not, we're building probably around a $13-14 million fire station in a $20 million campus, because part of the fire station project is making sure that occupants and people who utilize the community center have safe access to the community center. Anybody who's used the community center now knows that when you park, you're walking around DPW dump trucks that are coming in and out to do their daily business. And looking at that. So what I'd like to do now is sort of with that little bit of background, just open it up to you folks and see sort of what questions you might have, or, things that, and I don't want to say misunderstandings, but things you've heard in the community that seem ambiguous. Because again, looking forward to May 11th town meeting, the best questions are the ones we answer before they're asked. And that, so, does anybody have any questions, about how we got here or our program? And I know that John wants me to mention emergency management, and I will in a minute, but focus on this now. Does anybody have any questions? Bob, sure, go for it.
The basic
Yeah.
one that we all leap at is, I'll just accept that when I look, and fire stations, for a variety of reasons, come in at like $600 a square foot, as opposed to, we'll say, $200 a square foot for what I would have thought was comparable. So some question of how much of that really does apply. But,
yeah,
but sort of beyond
yeah.
that, it just feels like in a 20-minute search, you can find 87 recent fire stations built by so-and-so for so many engines, yada, yada.
Yeah.
Feels like somewhere there's a design, if you've got a flat piece of ground, nothing magical about it. Isn't there something you could latch onto beyond $2 million or whatever number you're looking at, of drawing a new box with doors on the front of it?
Yeah,
and
windows too, those are important. Yeah, no, exactly. So a couple of things with this. So one thing looking at the price that HKT Architecture and Preliminary Design came out to about $450 a square foot. If you look at the Peterborough Library, and again, I'm not disparaging anything, that was 13,000 square feet of new construction, about 4,000 square feet of renovation, for a gross price of about $10 million when you include all the design. That's $588 a square foot. They spend more in the library than we're proposing for the fire station and the ambulance facility. So that's, again, looking at perspective and understanding that. And that was in 2018 dollars, 2020 dollars, not 2022 dollars. So a couple things that lead to the costs. One of them is some of the design requirements. If you're looking to at any point in time utilize federal funds, one of the things, and this is where I'll tie the emergency management in, one of the things Peterborough does not have is really an adequate emergency operations center. We're fortunate. 2008 ice storm was the last time we really had to do something long-term in terms of managing a disaster in the community. Although COVID was a quote disaster in the community, because we were all working remotely and nobody could be in the same room, we didn't need an EOC. We all did those functions in our own offices and looked at that. So an emergency operations center, there are certain design requirements you have to have for that and looking at that. The other thing that looks at cost is, one of the things with this building is the energy and environmental systems are designed to run essentially completely 24 hours a day. You know, you look at most other office buildings, they shut down, they have downtime, they have weekends, they have nights, they have holidays where they're not running. They're in sort of a conservation mode. Our operational space, you know, living quarters and everything is occupied and run 24/7. So there are some upfront costs that add to that. As for the design and the, you know, looking, it is true when you look around, there are a lot of communities that have managed to build smaller fire stations and the other thing. What you have to look at is, when it comes to the requirements for a fire station, it's important to take that from a community perspective. There are certain things that a fire department has to have available to it. It has to have some place to obviously store its equipment and store its gear. It needs a space to train. It needs a space to clean turnout gear, to hang turnout gear. It needs administrative and operational space. A lot of communities spread this out amongst many buildings. They have many departments. So when you look at some of these communities, and one that keeps coming up is Northampton. Northampton is built a new fire station. Well, look at Northampton. They did this, they did that. Northampton's fire station is one of 3 buildings the fire department has access to, and they don't have an ambulance service. So, you know, it's very difficult until you dive into the inner workings of that department to see what they have and what they do. And so it's, you know, I would absolutely, we need to have these conversations. People need to understand what it takes to operate a fire station. I'm not going to use his name, but anybody who watched the last budget hearing we had, or not budget, excuse me, bond hearing, where the select board had the open meeting, there was one town resident who made the statement, you know, I've been in town for, you know, over 10 years now, and I really never paid attention to the fire department until now, and I can't believe they need this much money to build a fire station. And, you know, so it's really difficult for a lot of folks to wrap their heads around, oh my God, what do we need here, and where are we? But I think that if, you know, we would encourage people to come down and take a look at what requirements there are for a municipal building and for a fire department to get there. As for just stealing somebody else's plan, of course, you'd have to pay for those too. But, you know, the other thing that is difficult and people have a hard time wrapping themselves around is some of the costs that we have for this. Yes, they exist because we're looking to build a fire station, but if we were just building a fire station alone on a piece of land and didn't have to worry about incorporating a driveway for a DPW garage, pedestrian access to a shopping plaza, parking for the community center, there are other costs associated with putting the fire department there that are costs for the community, that really are the community going forward and tied directly into what Master Plan Steering Committee, what Evans Flats Committee has looked at over the decades as the appropriate use for that corner of town, that municipal space. Does that sort of answer it? I know it was long and drawn out.
Trust most.
Yeah. Dale, and then
Yeah, just what's the overall extent of the project in total?
in total. So,
And what's the anticipated cost incurred?
so I can answer the anticipated cost. We really have no idea yet. And one of the problems was the preliminary design. Ideal construction would be masonry, brick facade, steel. The building would last us 70 to 100 years, no questions asked. That's what we looked at for preliminary. That was where the exact cost of the fire station ran about $15 million. Your DPW, excuse me, your site work for the community center, parking, and the rest of that was estimated around 1.5, maybe a little more than that. And then there were the other costs that went into it. Engineering, we call it soft costs. Engineering, design, permitting, for example, there's a couple places where we have wetlands crossings that'll have to go through a DEP approval process, which there's extra cost for. And then things like FF&E, furniture, fixtures, you know, fit out, stuff like that, and contingencies for, oh yeah, we really didn't anticipate this. Guess what? Here's a change order. That brought the total anticipated cost up to somewhere in the $23 million range. For that. But again, that was preliminary design. You know, one of the first things we'll look at now is other construction methods. You know, and I'll give you an example. The current DPW garage is what's called a Morton building, which is a steel frame with the shell. Very good building. I mean, you can build those buildings. They were, you know, they're more than adequate. The issue is in 30 years, they'll tell you it probably needs to be reskinned or at least significantly renovated. Whereas a masonry and, you know, masonry building is going to give you 70 years. So we'll look at things like that and understanding that. So that's where we'll look at that. So the total scope of the project in a perfect world is taking that chunk, which is really everything from where the wetlands are between the site now and Route 101 over to just to the right of the community center, back to the DPW, creating safe, independent access and parking for the community center, building a fire and ambulance facility with dedicated access to Elm Street for emergency vehicles so they're not interfering with people doing other things, a driveway that provides access to folks using the fire and ambulance facility for business, so permits, training sessions, meetings, as well as running out to the DPW garage, and a pedestrian walkway so folks that are coming down Elm Street can safely access the Shaw's and CVS Plaza without having to walk up and down 101 as they do now. So that's sort of the full scope. It includes water, wastewater, you know, electrical, all those other things, drainage. The site, when the DPW was put there in 72, let's just say they didn't have the same environmental regulations they have now. There's really no stormwater management on that site. So we'll include overall stormwater management to help protect those areas of wetlands. So that's the, in a perfect world, the full extent of what we're intending to do on that site. James, and then.
One thing that doesn't get mentioned on here or in the article is that you serve numerous communities, not just Peterborough, and yet the money is all being thrown from Peterborough. How can that greater financial support be actually used to justify what's going on here rather than just all throwing it at Peterborough?
So I think what's important to realize is it's not all being thrown at Peterborough. This is a Peterborough town building. Peterborough runs a fire department and ambulance service. We have a contract to provide fire services to Sharon. We have ambulance contracts for the towns of Sharon, Dublin, Hancock, Francistown, and Temple. Those communities we serve are less than 23% of our total call volume. There is really nothing in this building that would change if all five of those towns were to go away. So their responsibility is not to the construction of this building. That is a responsibility for the town of Peterborough as the municipality that will own this building. Where they will come into it is the same way they come in now. Those communities, through the billing arrangement that we have with those communities, part of what they fund is the operating cost of that ambulance service. So the way our billing, and not to digress into that, the way our billing works, and I know Dale's familiar with this from his former role, he's still recovering from that former role in the town of Dublin, is the ambulance services, to quote one of our budget committee members, an ambulance is the only business in the world where you send a bill never expecting to get paid. Hospital may be a close second to that, but the ambulance service, we get reimbursed from insurance companies. The billing amount that we have is the difference between that reimbursement and our operating cost. That is allocated across all 6 of the towns we serve, including Peterborough. That allocation is based on a formula of population and call volume. So that varies annually based on the number of calls in that community and population shifts, which aren't that significant when you look at the overall. Those operating costs include the operating cost of the building. So those communities will be sharing their allocated cost of operating that building. The design and construction of that building really is the responsibility of the town of Peterborough, because it is a town of Peterborough building. We are looking at that building. So those communities, with or without them as an ambulance service, does not change the scope of our mission and the requirements of that building. And I realize that it's hard for folks to wrap their heads around that, but it is a very small share of what we do as a service. It is literally less than a quarter of our ambulance call volume is those communities when you look at the call volume in Peterborough alone and the transfer service out of Medina Community Hospital.
Again, part of the annual costs are being shared.
Annual costs will be shared just as they are now.
Includes costs of debt.
No, not cost of debt, because debt is the initial cost of the building. The building is a town of Peterborough building. Now, the ambulance service may at some point pay a share of that. The ambulance service is going to pay a share of that debt,
That's what I'm
but there
saying.
is no direct, we're not going around saying we're building a new building, give us money. There's no direct
I
ask to
understand that.
these
I'm
communities.
talking about the payment of the
Yeah.
cost, operational cost. It should be more known that it's
Yeah.
just not just Peterborough, but it's a great service you do
Yeah.
in our community. It ought to be more visible.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Norm, I know you hand up.
What about the police department?
So one of the things that was considered was in laying this out, was again, looking at the campus view. At some point in time, Peterborough PD is going to need to either do a major renovation or replace that building. For those of you who are, again, not to rehash it, the building in Peterborough PD was originally owned by Public Service in New Hampshire. The garage they have there was their garage. PSNH, through some consolidations, moved out of there. They're a little further down in some leased commercial space on Route 202. The town of Peterborough took that building over for their police department. So again, Peterborough PD moved into a building that was not designed as a police department and really does not necessarily meet their needs now, but works for them at some point in time. One of the considerations in the campus was ensuring, as we laid the building out, that we had adequate space to drop a police station there at some point in time if we needed to drop a police station there. So that has been brought into the consideration. And again, part of the preliminary design was, okay, how many square feet do you need for a police station? Yep, there's place to hang that off the back end of the building. And one of the advantages to combining that is some of the things that the Peterborough Police Department would need, for example, access to a fitness room, a training space, some storage space. Those things are going to be shared with the existing fire department building. So as opposed to building a separate building someplace where you'd have to have conference rooms, administrative space, training space, things like that, there can be the economy of that in the future. Anybody online?
Yes,
Peg, sorry.
thank you. My question is a little bit afield, and I apologize for that,
No.
but I'm a new select person, so therefore I am the link to the fire department in Harrisville. We have a large volunteer, we have a volunteer crew.
Mhm.
Not many of them are, and hardly any young ones. And we have a fire chief that is paid, but he's an elected official. One of our issues is recruiting volunteers. And then when we get further into the weeds, so to speak, and look at the details of it, it's very difficult for those volunteers to get training through the state. They really are not encouraging volunteer training.
Correct.
Do you use volunteers, and how do you get them trained?
Yeah, so our fire department, that's actually a very important point, Peg, that I glossed over. Our firefighters are all paid on call firefighters. So we do not have anybody in that building waiting for a fire call. All the folks that we have staffing are staffed for the ambulance. So we have our firefighters are essentially they're paid volunteers. It's called paid on call. We truly struggle getting people. We are very fortunate in Peterborough that we have some. Last year, we recruited 7 people onto the fire department. 4 of them are still in the fire department and very active. One's 60 years old, one is 52 years old, and the other 2 are in their 30s. But it is very difficult to attract those young people and to get them. We do most of our training in-house. We really, same as you, we struggle with the state of New Hampshire to offer training in this corner of the state. The new director of the academy just started a couple of months ago. Justin Cutting, great guy, has met with us as a group of fire chiefs and understands that concern. One of the problems that they face is that they will continually attempt to run classes and they don't get filled, because although there's a huge need for training, because your folks are all volunteers, or ours are, they all have a home life, they all have a job, some of them have 2 jobs. And it becomes very difficult to fit that training into people's schedules. We do a lot of our own training And one of the things that, I mean, there is a standard out there, the National Fire Protection Association has a standard for base level of knowledge for a firefighter. And we train to that, but it is incredibly difficult to keep those people trained. And it's a hard mix between providing them enough training to keep them engaged and keep them safe and effective in your community, and forcing too much training on them. So like, oh my God, I did not want to do this. I cannot afford a second full-time job. It is a very difficult mix to find for those folks.
Yeah.
All right, I know we're out of time.
Right, right.
I would seriously though, folks, encourage anybody, come down and talk to us. We're hoping to have at least one more, if not two, public sessions to discuss this. And like I say, the best question is one that's never asked. All right, thank you, folks.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, next meeting, same place, same time. We're gonna have Ben Fisk, who's gonna be actually next week and not today. He's talk about the maple industry, maple syrup and so forth. So we'll see you all next Tuesday. With that, just close in usual fashion. Service above self.
Service above self. Always proper promotion. Serve best.
I didn't hear a stop recording.